For many, the name Victor Plymire might not ring a bell. Victor was an Assemblies of God missionary to Tibet in 1908. He left the comfort of the United States to bring the gospel to a physically remote and spiritually dark land. But that hunger and vision didn't immediately bear fruit. It took 16 long years of laboring in Tibet before he saw his first conversion. 16 years of sowing, praying, and working without one visible result. Then came unimaginable sorrow. In his 19th year, his 6-year-old son contracted smallpox and died. As Pentecostals, Victor and his wife cried out for God's healing hand, but it was to no avail. In a letter he wrote later to his sister, he said, "On January 20, at 8:30 in the morning, Jesus took our boy to be with him. In soft, sweet whispers, before he went to be with Jesus, he told me that he loved Jesus. A little later he said softly, 'Daddy, Jesus loves me. I have no more pain.' This was the last he said. Then he was gone." Being a foreigner, the locals denied him burial rights, and so he dug into the frozen ground in his backyard and buried his son himself. 1 week later, his wife contracted smallpox and died as well. As he tried to dig again, a passing Chinese Christian had compassion and gave him a small plot of land. Having no more strength, Victor dug one grave for them both, burying his wife and child in foreign soil. He was alone and grief-stricken. This was a man who had devoted his life to God's will, left personal ambition behind, had taken his wife far from the comforts of home, endured years of loneliness and spiritual drought, and this is what happened to him. What do you do when serving God feels like it brings no return? When it seems like there is more pain in obedience than in rebellion? This is serving God with a question mark. We often forget that Job wasn't the only one suffering in his story. While Job was the intended target in this cosmic contest, there was tremendous fallout to everyone around him. He lost his children, his servants, his goods, and his livelihood. His wife also suffered, as she was equally devastated by those losses. Her famous words in Job 2:9, "Do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die," were not birthed out of defiance, but from anguish. Why did she say what she said? Because deep down she believed a common idea. If you do what is good and right, then God should look after you. The blessings and favor of God should rest upon your life. But if, after all that, God doesn't hold up his end and bad things still happen, then what's the point? If you lose everything, if life falls apart despite your righteousness, then some decide there's no longer any reason to be godly. No reason to keep doing things by the book. You can tell God where to go and be done with it. The book of Job makes it perfectly clear. Being righteous doesn't exempt you from human suffering. Even the most devout and blameless go through unspeakable pain. But even so, many Christians still believe the opposite. And why is that? Why does modern Christianity still push the idea that salvation equals smooth sailing? Come to Jesus and be happy. Get saved and God will give you the desires of your heart. Now, I'm not saying there's no joy in Jesus, or that he doesn't open doors, but much of modern preaching tries to hide the cross. It removes the pain, sorrow, and struggle from Christianity to make it look attractive, and in doing so presents a counterfeit version of the faith. People are set up to be disappointed because sorrow and pain will come to us all. There are two things many people, especially Christians, struggle to process. The first is when wicked people seem to live well. How is it that promoter Don King, a man linked to multiple homicides and allegedly financially ripping off multiple boxes for decades, or President Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe, a tyrant, can live comfortable into their 80s or 90s? 1 Timothy 5:24 says, "The sins of some men are obvious, reaching the place of judgment ahead of them. The sins of others trail behind them." In other words, some people's sins will catch up later. God is not mocked, but it still doesn't sit right with us. The second struggle is when good people suffer deeply. I've known women who have kept themselves pure, married one man, lived right, and yet couldn't have children. But the immoral girl down the street pops them out without a care in the world. So, what happens when people encounter these kinds of contradictions? The words of Job's wife shows us what happens when people feel that suffering isn't supposed to be a part of the Christian package. They cast off integrity. Integrity doesn't just mean moral uprightness. It means wholeness, like the structural integrity of a building. It means something that holds together under pressure. In some places, you'll see old buildings with cracks in the foundation, and you can tell they're just holding on by a thread, barely standing. That's what happens to some people's faith. They held it together with wrong expectations, and now it's unraveling. Job responds to his wife by using the word foolish, which in the original Hebrew means to faint, fall away, or become impious. That describes people whose inner lives collapse. I have met people who used to stand for something, but now when you see them, they're sarcastic, jaded, and unrecognizable. They become shells of their former selves, and deep down they think they're more righteous than God because He let them down. So they want to live how they want to live. Ted Turner, who is the founder of CNN, is a hostile critic of Christianity. He once said, Christianity is a religion for losers. He once joked that the Pope should step on a landmine. But in his youth, Ted was a Christian, and at one point even wanted to be a missionary. But his sister developed lupus, and Ted started praying an hour a day for her. Still, she died. After that, he walked away from God and never returned. Years later, his wife converted to Christianity and reportedly couldn't handle it and divorced her. Some people don't fall away completely. They become inconsistent. In Job 2:10, Job says we should accept adversity. But at the start of chapter 3, he's cursing the day he was born. His emotions and intellect are clashing. I remember a godly couple who lost 2 daughters shortly after birth. This was due to a rare genetic disorder. And the wife said, I love God. I'm not going to backslide. But why do some people have children they do not want? But the children I long for are dead. Some people go one step further. They decide to take no more steps in faith at all. They stop sacrificing, stop giving, stop contending. Like Elijah in 1 Kings 19, after risking his life and serving God faithfully, he basically said, I'm done. I've been doing everything right, and you, God, you have failed me. He wasn't just afraid, he was disillusioned. Today, many are like that. I'm not fasting anymore. I'm not giving anymore. I will not tell anyone about Jesus. Not because they hate God, but because they feel God didn't come through. And now they're done. Mike Tyson got baptized in 1988. It didn't stop him from beating his wife, committing adultery, and doing drugs. Then he was accused of rape and sent to prison. In prison, he converted to Islam, saying that if Christianity were true, he wouldn't have been treated unfairly. He once said, if Jesus were here, I'd fight him too. Here was a man who wanted to sin like the devil, but when it came to consequences, he blamed God. But many people do this. They live their own way, ignore God's laws, and then get angry when judgment arrives. Lamentations 3 says, even when I cry and shout, he shuts out my prayer. He has blocked my ways with hewn stone. Sometimes we're not victims, however. We're simply facing the consequences of our own decisions. Church people can be the same. They get involved in madness, then pray for deliverance. But sin has to run its course. Sin is deceptive. It can dull the mind of people so much that they don't even connect their actions to their outcomes. A pastor once asked why his church wouldn't grow. Months later, he was exposed for pornography. And sometimes it's not sin, but selfishness. People pray selfish prayer and expect God to bless them. Like the boy who answered Birmingham on his exam for the capital of Britain, then prayed for God to make Birmingham the British capital. Or imagine a wedding day with rain being forecast. The bride prays for sunshine, but the farmer prays for rain. Who should God listen to? As a result of disappointment and hope deferred, we say, well, I'm the good guy, so the problem must be with God. Jeremiah 15:18 says, "Will you surely be to me like an unreliable stream?" It's the idea of something that looks reliable, but dries up when you need it the most. Satan will link disappointment with the character of God, so that whenever you think of God, you feel let down. God, I trusted you, but you left me. Jesus, you knew how important that job was. Why didn't you help me? Regardless of how we view life, God's perspective is what matters. He sees on a divine scale while we are trapped in time. In Job chapter 1, Satan accuses humanity of being in it only for what they can get. Take away the blessings and it will curse you to your face. And so Job, without even knowing, becomes the man who defends humanity. He doesn't know it, but all of us are hanging in the balance as he suffers. Job may not have liked what he went through, but he was a part of something bigger. The Gospel of Luke captures the same disappointment when the disciples said we were hoping that it was he who would redeem Israel. Jesus was dead and hope felt gone. In the Gospel of John, we see that Peter returned to fishing. The disappointment of the cross was too much. Sometimes we need to remember it's not all about you. God loves you, yes, but he has other things going on. In Habakkuk chapter 1, the prophet cries out about injustice, but God responds, "I'm working a work you wouldn't believe." God was moving, but not where Habakkuk was looking. God doesn't have to explain himself. When Job complained, God never told him about Satan and that cosmic contest. He just said, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth?" As Christians, we must learn to walk by faith, not by sight. Habakkuk 2 verse 4 says, "The just shall live by his faith." That means living by what we know to be true, even when it doesn't feel true. It doesn't mean we have no questions, but it means we don't throw away our trust when life gets hard. Job 13:15 says, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." We also have to keep a right heart with God. Now, I'm not perfect, but one thing I've never been able to square is people who are bitter at God. That tells me something's twisted in their view of righteousness. Whenever I meet that backside, I ask the question, what did Jesus do to you? If people hurt you, I can understand that, but what did Jesus do? You must keep the distinction clear. Bad things in the world don't make God bad. Over the years, I've seen injustice, pain, and tragedy, but I've had to put it all in perspective and keep my heart right. You have to let go of some things, even when they seem unfair. You may not understand now, but one day, eternity will explain everything. Victor Plymire continued in Tibet for another 15 years, and eventually the church began to grow. In the 1940s, he returned to the US, and he died there in 1956. In the 1950s, the Chinese communists took over, and the church had to go underground. The communists confiscated all church properties. They confiscated everything. In the 1990s, the church, however, resurfaced and sought to get their properties back. But the communists said they had no proof that the buildings erected by Victor had ever been used as a church, which everyone knew was a lie. Desperate, the church leaders contacted Victor's cousin, David Plymire, asking if there was any evidence. David searched the archives and found no building deeds, but he did find something: the deed for the gravesite of Victor's wife and son. For some reason known only to God, Victor had deeded that land to the church. That document proved the church's existence, and when submitted to the authorities, they released all the properties, and the church reopened. Had a cemetery been available back in 1927, there would have been no grave, no deed, no proof, as the graveyard had been demolished and built over. The grave of his wife and son became the legal anchor that saved the church's future. Victor never lived to see how important that decision was, but God knew, and that's the point. Victor surely must have asked the question, why? But he kept serving. And so must we. We may not get the answer now, but eternity will reveal what today conceals. Until then, keep doing right, even when you feel let down, because you're not being let down. You just don't have the answers yet. And that is serving God with a question mark. Thanks for tuning in today. If you found value in this episode, be sure to like, subscribe, and share with others who might benefit. This is Jay Heart of Discipleship Matters, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.